because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a podcast devoted to philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we came to a realization that we are each of us being hunted by a silent and invisible killer, one that might catch us any day now. We're talking about David Robert Mitchell's debut film, It Follows. And we're delighted to be joined by Alison Willmore, a film critic at New York Magazine and Vulture, who's spoken to the man himself about how to escape the it at the center of this film. Welcome, Alison.
Thanks for having me. I've actually spoken to him twice because I did a regular interview with him when the film came out, and then he indulged me while I did an interview where I just asked all of the dumbest questions about the concepts, like, what if you went to a submarine? Did it get you then? Incredibly good sport about that. So
I think that's the one I read. I'm not sure if I read the other one actually, but I read that one, and I actually thought there was something revealing actually about that interview. So we'll come to that. But first, I want to start with, when did you first see the film? Did you review it when it came out, and what was your first reaction to it?
I don't remember if I reviewed it, but I did. This is one of those stories that sounds really obnoxious when you say it out loud. I saw the film at the 2014 Cannes Film Festival at its world premiere.
Awesome.
I, was familiar with David Robert Mitchell's first film, The Myth of the American Sleepover, and I had liked it. Also, when you're covering Cannes and you're kind of looking for any angles that will please your editor to be like, look, this film, it's an American film. It's maybe it'll be something. It's always, useful to check out the often, I think for many reasons, relatively restrained selection of American films in the program. And it was in the Uncertain Regard sidebar, I believe. No, or it wasn't even in Uncertain Regard. It was in maybe Critics Week. It was in one of the sidebar programs. It was not in the main program, but it was a packed house, and the main thing I remember is that it started, and as soon as I realized what the device was, the horror device, I had this strong urge to just leave because it hit so many of my particular sensitive spots for what I find frightening. Especially, and this is just on a kind of basic level, the whole idea of the shot of something walking towards the camera, I just find very instinctively frightening. Yes. And this film offers a lot of that very effectively.
Oh my gosh.
So
yes, any scene where somebody is just moving towards the camera with purpose like that is absolutely terrifying. And it's just, let's unpack that a little bit, because I agree. I'm with you. That is deeply frightening. And I don't totally know why. So tell me what it is about that's super frightening to you, Alison.
There are, I think, real strengths and limitations to the POV shots.
Yeah.
It can be a little funny or cheesy, right? There have been various experiments over the years in which, the camera is you. But I think that when it's done right, there's something about it that feels as if it were kind of breaking that fundamental divide between film and viewer, as if something were kind of able to see through to you. And I think that there's, I think a lot about that. There's a shot of Bob in Twin Peaks season 2 that I can't even watch, just the clip on YouTube where he comes out and crawls across the sofa.
Yeah, over the couch. Yes.
And you hear the panic breathing. I think that it can be so frightening on a very basic level because it feels like it's breaking the kind of compact of being a viewer, which is that
Yeah.
you are safe and removed. And so I think, that first scene where Jay in the movie wakes up and she's been bound to this like wheelchair in what looks like a maybe old like abandoned office building or parking garage. And the film, very carefully, like not like Hugh, the guy who has like kidnapped her, lights basically, like does the lighting,
Yeah.
so that like as it like walks directly towards the camera, and it's just terrifying. I think on a level that's like it feels instinctive. It doesn't feel rational.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. I want to actually dwell on this point just a little bit more, but then we want to talk a little bit about like, well, what is the what's going on in this film, just especially for listeners who might not yet have seen it and are just trying to figure out what to get, whether to go into it. I mean, one of the things that I think this idea of direct POV thing coming towards you evokes, there's a purposefulness of the thing coming towards you, and I think partly what's terrifying to me about it is that it disregards everything else around it. It's zoned in or zeroed in on you, the subject or whoever it's attacking or whatever. And I think there's something like alien about that I think is really, really, really horrifying. It's a little bit like I've seen it in other movies, and it's not always with a POV, but you get it in The Terminator, and that's a movie this movie calls back to a few times. But The Terminator, and what's scary about The Terminator is it's a thing that can't be reasoned with, and it's just coming to kill you, and it's just going to keep coming, and it's going to destroy you. And there's all these shots of Arnold. There are some POV shots, actually, now that I think about it, but there's a lot of shots of Arnold just walking through masses of stuff. Maybe it's people, he's pushing them aside, he's disregarding them, and he's just coming straight for his target, Sarah Connor. It's just something like, that's just not how humans behave, right? There's something so unnatural about that. And it's just deeply disturbing. And what's incredible about it is it can be done. You don't need makeup. You just need an actor who's going to walk straight at the camera and ignore everything else around you. It's remarkable.
I think also the thing that's frightening about the Terminator is, for all that they're very different, the idea of something that is tireless, and not necessarily fast, but is relentless in its pursuit, right? The whole kind of basic device of It Follows is that it's never going to run after you, but it's never going to stop. And, there's something to that I think becomes uniquely perverse as you kind of understand what it means for the characters over the course of the film.
Yes. So, Laura, tell us, we've talked a little bit about, but we've only sort of skirted the edges. Tell us about what the film's premise is.
Okay. So our protagonist is Jay. She is going on a date with Hugh, and they have sex, and right afterwards he chloroforms her, takes her to an abandoned parking lot of some sort, and explains to her that he's passed on a curse to her, and and that there is going to be something following her. It will never stop. The only way she can get rid of it is by having sex with somebody else and passing on the curse that way.
Yeah.
If she
or it will just kill her.
Or it will kill her. And if it kills her, it'll kill Hugh and down the line. And so that's her conundrum, what to do with this curse. It's in it follows, it always embodies a person.
Yeah.
It can be somebody you know, it can be somebody you don't know. It can take any shape. It's slow, but not stupid. And it never stops.
Yeah. He says at one point, wherever you are, it will always be walking straight towards you. Which is, again, this idea of like, maybe it's going to just walk through the ocean.
Right.
Jesus Christ. Like it doesn't need to breathe. It's just going to be coming straight for you. The other thing is that only you can see it. Only people who've been hit by the curse can see it. So that's the other aspect, which makes it harder to convince other people that, this thing is affecting you. Good. So if for listeners who were deciding, should I see this movie? look, it's really scary. It's really fun. That's the premise. From now on, we're going to spoil the film. Although, in a way, I don't feel like this is really a spoilery movie, but we are now going to spoil the film.
If we talk about what happened at the end, then I suppose we will be, because there's a little, you and I are not totally clear on what happened at the end.
I think
We have
it's
different
open-ended. It's
interpretations.
open-ended. But so Alison, you spoke with Mitchell about the just about the mechanism, and you did ask him a bunch of things of all the, as you said, all the zany ways of
if you use a
avoiding.
condom, will that protect you?
So, I mean, I'm curious, like, from that conversation / just your own thinking, let's just start here. Like, what would be the best way to avoid this creature? Like, what would you do if you were in this situation?
I mean, beyond abstinence, I suppose.
Yes.
If it's too late.
Which is,
yeah.
Yes. I feel like, leading a rootless life of international travel is probably the safest bet. But I think the thing that the film gets at that really, I think two things that the film gets at. One, that they're teenagers.
Yeah.
And so, so much of the kind of curse and the idea of the curse is that they don't really know what they're doing. They're not making great decisions. They're impulsive. They don't have much by way of resources. But I think also the idea of always being on the run becomes deeply unappealing. I think the way that the film ends, which we'll talk about later, it ends on this kind of uncertain note where you really start to feel like the characters are just going to live lives of terror, or just like being uneasy for the rest of your life, being unsure about whether this thing is going to find its way back to you with no warning. And I think that premise makes you understand why the character in the kind of cold open of the film chooses to do what she does, and the film opens with a character who I think it's implied to be someone who is involved with Hugh, right? But that she essentially chooses to go out by the lake and let the creature catch her, and that it's a great opening. It's really unsettling. It's unclear what's going on, but it also gives you this image that makes it very clear that, like, when you're caught by the creature, it does not go gently.
Right.
It's a really gruesome image. But yeah, I think that the idea of having something always hanging over your head makes
it seems
this,
exhausting.
Yes.
Just building off of the things that you said. I mean, one of the things that the second part of what you said just about the inevitability of it is, I think, so potent in this film. And that, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, so I won't speak with authority on this, but I've heard it tell that many or most or all of our fears boil down to the fear of death. And in a way, this film just boils that down to the simplest thing, which is you will die. You won't know when, and you won't know how, but it is going to happen inevitably. And when I say those words out loud, we're all like, yeah, of course, obviously. We're all going to die. It's all going to happen, But nonetheless, the premise of this film, which is effectively just described just like I just did, is absolutely terrifying. And I think that's partly because it's a confrontation with death and our own mortality that I think is what is so frightening. I think we recognize it. We all understand. Any, adult person recognizes, yes, life doesn't go on forever. But coming to terms with that is incredibly difficult. And it's something many of us struggle with our entire lives. And I suspect that's part of what drives the fear of this movie is that, in a movie like Alien, which has a similar kind of thing happening where there's a thing and it's coming and eating people and so on. That's obviously incredibly scary, but I'm never going to outer space. So I said it right here. It's never going to happen. I don't expect to encounter a killer xenomorph anytime soon. That said, I do have to come to terms with the fact that I will die, and that is difficult. And so I think that by distilling it down to the sort of primal elements, I think that adds and makes the film that much more effective.
I think also there is something about the very deliberate choice to have this film be taking place, with this group of teenagers, right?
Yes.
They're just out of high school, but they're not quite adults yet. They're really in this liminal space in life. And I think that having, the it be a very, a kind of really dark stand-in for the basic understanding of mortality, I think is I think it clearly is. But it's worth pointing out that this is a film that's set amidst characters who are teenagers.
Yeah.
They're not in high school anymore, but they're not really adults yet. They live at home. They live in this kind of very liminal space in between, adulthood and childhood. That it's not just that they're grappling, being confronted with mortality for the first time. It's that they still haven't really accepted it yet.
That's right.
It is like, it is not a film about people who are coming to terms with mortality. They are certainly not there yet. It is about just that first glimpse of it in the distance, walking towards you inexorably. And I think that's part of what the juvenile point of view is part of what makes it so effective. It is not a grown-up, grappling with the idea of eventual death. It is this very first alarmed brush with the concept.
I have two thoughts on this point. One is that, like, from the perspective of an older person, you might think this is actually not that scary. Why? Because you're like, well, I've lived my life and maybe I'm suffering and I want to die. I also think, though, to your point, Alison, that these are kids who are just confronting this for the first time. Hugh, when they do that little game I think it's when they get into the theater, and she's like, "Tell me who you want to be." Like, right.
He picks the child.
He picks a child, and the reason for picking the child is that he says, "Well, he has his whole life ahead of him." Right? He wants more time. He wants to continue this on. He's like an old man because he's realized, oh crap, I've got a death sentence, and so. It would be better to go back to the beginning, which is often what old people say, right? They'd be like, I want to go back to being a kid again because then I have my whole life ahead of me. But to her in that moment, it doesn't make any sense. You're like, wait, you're 19 years old. What do you have your whole life ahead of you? Right. So, but it's only because he's had this encounter with death and has confronted his own mortality, or at least, he's being forced to confront it, that this is now seen to be the ideal.
Okay, then. Who'd you pick?
Him.
The dad?
No, the son. I mean, how cool would that be to have your whole life ahead of you, you know?
Come on. It's not like you're old. You're 21.
I know, but look at how happy that kid is. Plus, at that age, you can go to the bathroom anytime you want. Total freedom.
Yeah. He's probably taking a shit right now.
Yeah, exactly. I can never get away with that.
I think, too, because, in that moment, Hugh thinks he's going to pass this on to her and be free. So he might think he still has his whole life ahead of him. But the difference, he has had a taste of mortality in some way, but I think the thing he's also come to realize, that all the characters are coming to realize in this moment, is that they don't have infinite freedom anymore. Their life can't go a million different directions. It's they joke that the kid can poop his pants and nobody cares, like that kind of freedom.
True, yeah.
But I think it's like he realizes that at this point in your life, when you're 20, you have already made decisions. Events have already happened in your life that are going to stay with you for the rest of your life. And mold the course of who you will be and the course of your life, and that's a little bit terrifying. You wrote that article, Justin, about characters coming to sort of grapple with that too in Nolan films, right? And you realizing that moment that you couldn't be when you were a kid, realizing like, oh, I can't be a rock star and be a virologist and be a philosophy professor. Like you sort of have you make choices and those paths go certain ways and you're somewhat stuck with that for good or for ill. And similarly, like the events that happen to you, even if it's not choices, like traumas that you've experienced stay with you for forever and ever.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that they're like, at 20 years old, that's just as scary as realizing you're gonna die.
There's a lot of stuff that happens when you're 20 or 19, right?
Yeah.
You graduate high school and then all of a sudden the world's like, great. College or job or career or kids or you know what? And like, are you going to start saving for retirement? And
Oh my
like,
God.
you know, all these things happen when you transition out of that high school moment. And clearly all of the characters in this are stuck in that stunted adolescence where they're all post high school but living at home.
Mhm.
They're delaying it, right? They don't want to actually confront that because it's, for whatever reason, it's too much. And I mean, I've been there. I went to college for a year and then dropped out of music school and I moved back in with my parents for a year and went to junior college. So there were all these, I had this kind of stunted adolescence. I get the pull of that. I actually still live in stunted adolescence too. Actually, that's a plug for being a philosophy professor, is that you could just you can live a childlike life forever.
Until you have a child and it ruins
Oh,
everything.
Another thing about that scene where they're in the theater and Hugh like points to the child is being taken care of by
Yeah.
a parent in that scene, is like being helped, I think, get like a drink from a drinking fountain or something.
Yeah.
And Hugh, we see, had like briefly during this experience before he passed the curse along, had been like living in this squat, with like alarm system set up and kind of, but then when we find him back at home, he's living in this like upscale suburb back at his parents' house. And, as opposed to Jay and her sister, who, we get all of these like little bits of glimpses of their home life and the reality of it only on the side, which is one of the things I love about the film, that we understand that their dad is gone. And we understand that in part because one of the last forms that it takes is their dad. We only know that because of the photos that are up in the house, and that like their mom, as much as we ever see her, and the film doesn't really show her face, even when we see her talking, is always drinking. And one of the neighbors says something like, those people are such a mess. When the cops get called, there is this real sense of both, I think, a sense of like downward mobility in their particular neighborhood, but also of the fact that their kind of domestic life has been fracturing for a long time. And I think there's this interesting theme throughout the movie that's really kind of built into how the monster works, which is that when you are the one who is vulnerable, you are vulnerable even in crowds of people. Everyone else is going about their day-to-day business with normalcy while you are dealing with this panic, which I think becomes a kind of handy metaphor for all kinds of like economic or personal, vulnerabilities, and that feeling that you can be in a normal crowd with, disaster heading your way.
Yes. Okay. So there were two really important things in what you said there, Alison, which I want to tease apart and actually discuss separately. Which one is the sort of allegory to class, and in particular the economic system as an allegory in the film. But then the other is the notion of trauma. And I will say that there's a scene in this film that the scene that got me was the scene where she's in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the teachers, actually, Laura, you
Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock.
Okay, so
T.S. Eliot.
You wrote down the poem that's being read, and she's like half heart, she's listening kind of, but she's staring out the window and she sees again this thing that is moving towards her, ignoring everything around her. Absolutely, utterly terrifying. And we slowly see the realization, and it's mounting, and there's like kind of panic that's mounting on her face, and she's deciding, should I leave, or is this no, maybe that's not real. Okay, it is real. All right, I should leave. Right? She's going through that steps, and then she eventually just gets up and leaves. And that feeling of panic when you're in a space where it's sort of uncomfortable to leave. I mean, you spend a lot of time in movie theaters. That's another place where it's sort of uncomfortable to get up.
I mean, in that scene, the professor, says like, "Excuse me," like it's not like she just slips out unnoticed.
Yeah. There's like a social dimension to the anxiety as well, because it's not appropriate to do that and so on. This is all by way of saying I felt that totally, because I have suffered from anxiety in my life, and I've had panic attacks in a classroom, and had the feeling of needing to leave. And that's the feeling that you when you're having a panic attack, one of the things that is, it's very flight or fight, but it's mostly for me flight. It's like leave. Whatever is happening, I need to get out of that situation. I need to depart it. But the fear compounds itself because I don't want to break the social taboo, right? Of like just getting up and running out of the room for no reason. So it compounds itself in this way. So you're basically like in a sweat, like trying to decide what to do. And I feel like this film just captured that perfectly. And that's just to your point of this idea that there's a person who looks normal from the outside, but inside they're undergoing the most extreme turmoil, and nobody can know about it except them. That's a really interesting way of thinking and thinking about and depicting trauma in film. And that, trauma often manifests itself in terms of anxiety and, in particular, very acute anxiety that can be triggered by certain things. And that just seems to be what is going on, when, that or at least is one way of understanding the allegory of the film. I think the other dimension of trauma is something that you were talking about, Laura, about that trauma typically is something which doesn't just happen and then sit there. It manifests itself in actions which can themselves be traumatic for other people. So if you think about like a soldier who comes back from a war and is experiencing PTSD, they might then act out in ways on their children, potentially physically and psychologically abusing their children, thus causing their children a certain degree of psychological trauma, and therefore perpetuating this cycle. So there's a sort of, the other dimension of the allegory is it's like this thing that you have to pass on. It's like, it's a sort of thing that's like, it's infectious and it gets passed on. Or another example is like bullying. Like, I don't know if you guys experienced this kind of thing in like high school. That's a common setting, but this happened to me again. I guess this film is touching a lot of personal points for me, but I experienced some degree of bullying, not extreme amounts when I was younger in like middle school and so on. But then there were moments when I was presented with the opportunity to be a bully, right? So I was not just being bullied. I'd be being bullied from some guy. And then when that guy'd leave, there'd be someone who was lower in the social pecking order than me. And so I had the opportunity to be a bully, and then I would act out that way towards them for whatever reason. I don't quite understand why, but it was the thing that I would do to get whatever that first bully took from me. I was trying to get it back from that other person. So it is this sort of this chain that just continues. It's like a cycle that just continues, right?
And you're so trapped when you're in this situation too, because Jay's quandary the entire time is, okay, can I pass it on? Am I like, can I accept the consequences of knowing that I'm going to hurt somebody else by doing that in order to save myself? And she sort of refuses to do it several times and then ultimately does with some plans. But if she doesn't and she dies, she also then knows other people die. No matter what she does, she's, causing harm to other people, through no real fault of her own, through no knowledge before she went into the situation. But so much of the movie is just her trying to decide, like, am I able to do this to another person? And there's a question of whether or not, if she gives it to Paul, does Paul pass it on to a sex worker? It's not clear that he ultimately does do it or not. But, in terms of like, that's pretty cruel too, in terms of, I was thought about that with the bully thing, like, finding somebody lower on the social order to pass that on.
You bully or you act out your traumas on people who are easy targets, right? You don't bully people who have high social value or whatever cachet because they're harder targets. So yeah, there's a kind of rolling downhill.
Yeah, I mean, that even comes up in the film, right? Like when she does decide to pass it along to someone, she picks Greg, who she clearly has a kind of uneasy past sexual history with, that's never really articulated, aside from, I think he says something like, I guess I could have been nicer to you. So it's not like it's just a neutral choice. There is like another character who has like was clearly like ready and willing to take on this burden, but when she does decide to pass it on for the first time, it is certainly not without a degree of history. So yeah, I think she is both put in this impossible quandary ethically, but also is a teenage girl with history, with a lot of history with all of the people around her who she's grown up with, and so she can't help but make a choice that is loaded a bit with maybe a touch of knowledge and maybe a touch of vengeance as well.
Yeah, it is notable that she chooses him rather
Then Paul.
than Paul. Yeah, she chooses Greg rather than Paul because she has some degree of affection towards Paul, it seems. Right? She was trying to protect him, although in the end that's sort of up for grabs. But the other aspect of this that I thought that you mentioned and I thought is really important to touch on is the thinking of it all as an allegory for for basically capitalism. I mean, if you really writ large, you could think of it like that. I mean, if you think about what the capitalist system is it's fundamentally a system of like labor exploitation. I mean, sorry, this is my like leftist roots coming through, but it's also a great system, but it's also a system of exploitation, and it requires a certain amount of churn to perpetuate itself, right? It doesn't the economy needs money to be flowing through it. If the money starts to as soon as the economy stops and the money stagnates, then everything goes haywire and you get fiscal collapse. So everything needs to be moving, right? The system has to do this or else it dies. And that's a lot like this creature, right? This creature has to constantly be finding new hosts in a way. It's like a parasite that wants to perpetuate itself. And it does that by co-opting our reproductive system, much like capitalism co-ops our desire to hoard things, to like possess things. It co-ops that and exploits it to create this self-perpetuating system, one that is often invisible, right? Like the experience of a person like maybe these kids growing up in suburban Detroit is going to be one where they don't see any alternatives to the capitalist system. They just see, oh yeah, this is just the way things are. You work at the ice cream store and then you make some money and you buy a car and you buy a clamshell Kindle or something like that. Part of the genius of that system is that it retreats into the background and it's invisible, much like the creature in this film. But it is this thing that's co-opting us and perpetuating itself through us. The other thing is that it's always people with more power within the system, namely people with more money, that are exploiting the people with less money, right? And using them to keep themselves alive. And again, that's, my guess is that this thing started somewhere higher up. I mean, at least that's how I'm thinking of it. This cycle started higher up in like the high classes, and it's slowly working its way down, ultimately gonna, end up down in the lower classes. And then if maybe it works its way back, of course, it's always coming back, but it comes back and then it goes, but it's always going downward. They're always pushing it downward. And it makes sense why they would do that. Who can you ultimately convince on short notice to have sex with you, right? It's always going to be someone that you have some degree of like power over, like they want you in some way, right? And so you're just going to be easier to find people who are more, who are lower social class than you for that reason. And so this thing's always going to move in that direction. And I don't know, I find that very interesting. It's also interesting that they're middle class. So they're, we pick up the movie right in the middle of this cycle. We don't know where it started. We don't know where it's going to end. We're in the middle, and they're middle class. Like, so it's right kind of all happening in the center. And anyway, I find that all very intriguing. I mean, here's another intriguing note. I'm curious what you guys think of. It's in Detroit, and there's no black people, and there's all this conspicuous shots of the central urban core of Detroit, which is largely, bombed out, and these broken down buildings and abandoned houses and so on. Incredibly conspicuous. They even talk about it in the film. Like, it's so right there. I'm curious what you guys think of all this.
Well, it's not set in Detroit, right? It's set in the white suburbs in Metro Detroit.
Yeah.
It is like very deliberately set in, a whole space that was created by white flight and redlining, and a literal wall being built, the 8 Mile Wall. I think, I don't know if either of you have seen The Myth of the American Sleepover.
No,
we haven't.
No.
It's very much I think like they're kind of pairings. Like the Myth of the American Sleepover is set similarly in the kind of like towards the end of, well, I think like It Follows makes it the time of year deliberately very muddy, but Myth of American Sleepover is set towards the end of summer. You have all of these different characters of different ages throughout high school and one who's in college, and it's just them like spending a night kind of traveling around looking for their various romantic interests, and it's very kind of vaguely Linklater-ish, maybe a bit more dreamy, but like I think like much more kind of positive in terms of its depictions of a lot of the suburban iconography of you know uh a lot of absent parents, but in this case, kind of keeping themselves out of the picture, a lot of riding bikes down big streets, so this, I think, is like deliberately the kind of dark older sibling of that movie. But both of them are very much intentionally set in the same suburban area. And I think what's so interesting about the way this film uses that is that it deals with the idea of all of these characters living in a place that was like deliberately created as this particularly loaded refuge, right? Like this place where of lawns and of good schools and all of the things that lured, in this case, mostly white families out to purchase houses and chase the American dream. And the city becomes, as much as we ever see it, we never, we don't see any. There are almost no people of color in this movie. There are almost no people when you go into the city proper.
Yeah.
When they
Nobody,
go there,
It's like empty.
Never in a place that is right. Like it actually people by city residents.
Right.
It's a neighborhood where he was squatting. That's emptied out houses. It's the empty built office buildings, and then it's the pool at night, right? The pool, which is closed down. But yeah, I think that it uses the suburbs as a kind of physical stand-in for the idea of the kind of obliviousness and naivete of youth in the case of these characters. When they actually emerge from the imperfect kind of swaddling nature of the neighborhood they grew up in, they actually go into the city, right? Those are whenever they go into some place that is like unsettling and that seems to kind of represent the unknown by way of this curse, it often involves going into the city. And I think those are lined up very deliberately.
Yeah.
Yara says towards the end, even like, my parents would never let me go past south of 8 Mile. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, but I do think it's interesting that what drives them into the city is this disruption of being, of their potential mortality, right? They that's where they go to sort of resolve it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
right, because when they try and escape it, they go north to the lake, right? Which doesn't work at all.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, no, they go to the lake first. That's right.
Yeah.
They do go to the lake first. But yeah, it is interesting that I guess I was just sort of thinking it's like trying to tie it together with the final bit with Paul and the sex workers, where it's like they, where do you go to take out the trash? You go to the grungy parts, right? And dealing with this is like taking out the trash, and it's the first time they've ever had to do that. It's the first time they've ever had to get their hands dirty with anything.
And the most terrible agony may not be in the wounds themselves, but in knowing for certain that within an hour, then within 10 minutes, then within half a minute, and now, at this very instant, your soul will leave your body and you will no longer be a person. And that this is certain. The worst thing is that it is certain.
But the thing that's telling about that second Dostoevsky bit is he's talking about the physical pain.
Mhm.
So he's like, physical pain, it really sucks. But let me tell you what sucks more.
Existential pain.
Yeah, existential pain. Knowing you're gonna die, that sucks worse. And I think the film in a way starts with physical pain. The first character we see has the limbs broken. And by the end of the film, and we've seen some jump scares and some quite effective jump scares, which are physical because they provoke this sort of physiological response. But by the end of the film, the thing that's going to linger with us is not the jump scare and it's not the shot of the person's leg bent back. it's this uneasy feeling that they're constantly going to be hounded by death wherever they go, and that their predicament is our own.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing that makes this film, I don't know, like continue to resonate, and why I think people will keep coming back to it is that there's something primal about that that like the film forces us to confront our own mortality by showing a bunch of people do it, very much on the nose. And so maybe that's what's going on in that Dostoevsky. It's this sort of like showing you the different parts of the film in a way. Like it's a recap almost of like what was terrifying about this film. And here's what I'm going to leave you with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ending, which I think has been a divisive one for some people, especially certain horror fans who wanted a kind of cleaner, more maybe kind of satisfyingly climactic, resolution. But I do think that's key to why it is so haunting, which is that by the end, the kind of threat of this horrible physical altercation of like being, maimed and dying feels simple compared to the idea of just living the rest of your life
in dread
with this dread, with a kind of very real version of the mortality that all of us have to grapple with. Just hanging over you. That shot of the two characters walking down the street, and I think there's like someone behind them, which is probably just a pedestrian, but also maybe, you never know. It all looks the same to us as the viewers. So yeah, I really love the way it kind of ends on an ellipsis instead of a period.
That is in the rules of the game, right? Because Hugh /
it's never going to
Jeff
stop.
says that even when you pass it along, you still see them. And you never know, like,
if it's coming for you.
If it's coming for you, it might, if it continues on down the line, let's say, but you don't know if those people in front of you have passed. Like now, it's going to start coming for you rather than just sort of benignly hanging around you. But you never know who, what person in a crowd is going to be it, and if it is after you or no. But but I think the rules of the game are that you're never really done.
Yeah.
There's no safety anymore.
No.
Which is enough to leave anyone looking at the kid, the drinking fountain with his parents and want to trade places.
Yeah.
And then live a life of abstinence. On that point, actually, I thought the thing that Mitchell said in response at the very end of the interview that you did with him, where, it was like, well, maybe just be abstinent. And he says, yeah, but like that would suck. Like you would live a life where you don't have sex, like and you can't be, really it's a life where you can't really be intimate with another person, even somebody you love. And like that would be terrible. Like, like that's not really a life worth living. So that's not even an option in a way. If you think about it, you'd be like, well, if your choices are like live a celibate life, not of your own choice, or die. I guess I just die, right? Like, I mean, so I thought that was an interesting thing that he said there, and
I think people have made the case that this is a puritanical film because characters. It is about an STI, a ghost, a killer ghost by way of or demon, whatever it is. But I do think that it's so much more complicated than that. It's not just like slasher film morality where the characters who have sex or who drink, they all get killed, and it's the sober virgin who lives on to survive into the sequel. It's the idea that this is just engaging with life, right? Like it is to open yourself up to the unknown, which includes often some dark potential. And that is simply part of growing up and entering the mysterious kingdom of adulthood.
Yeah.
To be a human being. It's part of the human predicament that we're all in. And you would be denying an aspect of your humanity, one, if you didn't engage in loving and that kind of thing. But you'd also be denying an aspect of your humanity if you didn't, if you constantly denied to yourself the knowledge that you are going to die. To bring up another, so Dostoevsky is often read in existentialist literature, because, as an existentialist and within the tradition of existentialism. But to bring up another existentialist, Sartre, he talks about the notion of bad faith being effectively self-deception, right? Deceiving yourself into thinking that the choices that you make are not your own because they're determined by things outside of you is the paradigm example. But I suspect another form of bad faith would just be refusing to accept that you're going to die. And so part of humanity, part of living a genuine and authentic life is to reckon with that. And they are now having to do that, just like we are. And it's very effective, I think, in what it does, in instilling that dread that's at the core of human existence.
Mm-hmm.
So I just said a bunch of crazy shit. Now I'm thinking about it. I'm like, man, I'm not that dark. I'm not that dark. I'm wearing a Metallica shirt, but Alison, wait. So we just a real quick question. We disagreed about what happened at the end, but so Laura, tell me your thought about what happened. I thought basically she thought she killed it,
And then
she had sex with Paul because she was like, "We're in the clear."
No.
I don't know. I wasn't paying any attention, I
No.
guess. But tell me what your read was.
I mean, this all like really revolves around this one line reading. But okay, so my thinking is that they try to kill the thing. They decide that didn't work at all. So now she's like, all right, even though I said I wasn't going to pass it on to you, he's offered many times. She says, all right, screw it. Like I can't really like have the burden of getting this to a stranger. I'm going to give you that burden and you're going to give it to a stranger. And then we'll both be in the clear. But like, I'm involving you because you've asked. And like, now we have no other option. We can't figure out how to kill it.
Yeah.
And then there's the scene where he may or may not have passed it to a sex worker. We see him driving.
Well, that's the part I wasn't clear. I mean, you're right that it is set up that when I thought about it, I was like, okay, yeah, I guess.
So they're walking down I think when they're walking down the street holding hands, they both think they have like, if not totally been rid of it, like have passed it.
Yeah,
on.
I think that's right. Because he's passed it on to a sex worker.
Yeah. And so, but I think like the reason that I feel fairly confident that the scene that in which they're having sex is a one where she is attempting to pass the curse on is when he's like needling her, saying like, I liked you too. And why did you pick Greg? And he tries to kiss her and she moves away. And then he says, I want to help. She just says, do you?
Yeah.
I think she's so sick of dudes at this point.
Yeah.
Like she's like, they've gotten her into this mess, like Hugh Jeff, whatever his name is, has gotten into this mess. And all these guys are like trying to like help by getting in her pants. And, like they keep joking about how Paul's salivating over her and she might care for him, but I do not think she's attracted to him. And I do not think she wants to be with him. And I feel really ambivalent about the ending of the film, not because there might be somebody following it, because they're holding hands at the end. And I'm just like bummed out about it. Cause I think maybe she thinks like, oh, I've tried bad boys and now this guy's so sweet. So I've ended up with the sweet guy. And I'm like, did you?
Yeah, that's
or did you end up with a toxic nice guy? But yeah, that's why I feel strongly that the scene in which they're having sex is one in which they're like, all right, plan B, because the pool thing did not work.
I want to help.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, Alison, what was your read on the end of the film?
Okay, well, before I do that, I will say we haven't talked about this, but there is the scene where she swims out to a boat
That's
full
true.
of guys, and it is heavily implied that she has sex with them and they die before it comes back around.
Yeah.
Right.
So she is also not, free from sacrificing strangers.
Yeah.
Yep.
Vulnerable strangers who don't know what's going on. But for me, the way I read it was that she accedes to a romantic relationship with Paul that may or may not be based on actual desire on her part, but feels kind of inevitable for her because of what they've just been through. That they both think that maybe they beat it in the pool, but also don't necessarily really believe it. So that when she has sex with Paul, that is her being like, we're together now, but also in the back of both of our heads, this may be me passing this along to you in case what we did didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why he then goes and passes it along to a sex worker, who presumably then passes it along to her next client, and the chain goes on. But I didn't necessarily read it as entirely calculated on her part. I kind of read it as a mix, that it is her, genuinely being like, well, let's be together. However, maybe not passionate or kind of deeply convincing that relationship feels like it will be in the long run. But that, it was a kind of, we've been through this, let's be a couple now. But that I think both of them kind of understood as well that they weren't necessarily free of this thing, that they didn't necessarily feel that it was taken care of forever. That's why I think that like the pool scene is it had initially annoyed me, but I like it. I have liked it a lot more in subsequent reviewings or viewings, because it doesn't make any sense for why it would work, right? Like nothing about the plan is like a great plan. And then nothing about why it appears to work makes it seem like it should.
Yeah.
Like they've shot the creature before and it just got back up. And so why this particular instance seems to work, and whether it would be lasting, all of those are question marks. So yeah, I don't think that it's a particularly romantic ending, but I do think that both of them are going into it with some attempt at being like, we are together now.
Can I just say one thing that's very interesting about the way the film just starts to become more elliptical, not even right at the end, but just a little bit before, right in that pool scene, because, they've got the last thing that you see in that scene is her creeping over the edge to look in the pool, and it's just full of blood. But there's like a million questions you have at that point, right? You're like, 1, is the thing moving? 2, are you gonna do your plan now, which is electrocuted? They don't show that, right? They're not like, and then we threw the toasters.
It doesn't work, right? Because like it threw a bunch of that stuff in the pool and it didn't
electrocute her.
Yeah, it didn't. I guess that's true. But I was started thinking they would be like, you put it all in at once or something, and that would, I don't know. But and then you're like, 3, is it still? You would know if it's coming for you or not, or should you be like, but so they know at least, right? But all that is elided over, and we just cut to the next scene, and I think that's really cool, right? Because he denies us the thing that we want in that moment, which is the resolution. One way or the other, we want to know, did it work or not? That's the resolution we want. And he denies us that. So you're left in that moment of the next scene being like, okay, so really uneasy. And then since it never is resolved, the film just kind of goes on. And so, when it ends and the credits roll, you're like, the fuck just happened? So, and I think that's really cool. To both of your points, just like, that's what is the thing that lingers with you. The other thing that lingers with me is the manifestations of the creature. So I'm curious which one was the most horrifying? Which manifestation of the it was the most horrifying?
For me, it's the old woman. It's the classroom scene. I think, there's some very effective kind of more jump scare appearances, like the tall man, or the kid crawling through the hole in the door, or the naked guy on the roof when you see is also a very good one.
Yeah.
But for me, there is no scene that is scarier than the old woman. And I understand, like gerontophobia is this total horror film cliche. And yet the way that happens, like the kind of how far away she is when she's first seen, and the kind of normalcy of the setting, and as you mentioned, Justin, the tension of having to break through the kind of social contract of being in class and to be like, I have to run. I think is so well done, and then just blankness on the actor's face who was playing it at the time. There's so many. There's we never get an explanation for what it is, but I love that how much the different incarnations sometimes seem to imply people who have been are kind of have been like pushed to the outskirts of society in some way, or have been the victims of sexual violence themselves. You know, the version that appears in the kitchen is very just like evocative of some terrible things. But that scene, I think it's just because of the way it's presented is just so frightening to me.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we just watched X. So last night.
Which is just filled with
yes,
a lot of acknowledgement of the unfairness of ageism.
Yep.
And then also a fair amount of ageism.
Yes. yeah. But just that image of the woman walking, and she's wearing a hospital gown. Is that what she's wearing in the?
Yeah. Hospital, and it looks like almost like maybe compression socks or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Oh my God.
It feels like the outfit that someone might have died in. Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, the woman in the kitchen for me is the scariest part.
Yeah, that's
and
terrifying.
It reminds me when I saw The Sixth Sense when I was 12. It seared itself into my soul. But the woman in the kitchen again, who I think has cut her wrists and is screaming at the kid in The Sixth Sense. That one was always the one that really upset me the most too. And I'm like, what happened to this girl? I'm like, there's whole stories behind that, and it's so scary. And she's almost looking like, instead of like, I'm coming for you to hurt you, she's almost looking like, help me. Right, because and we know too, I think Hugh/Jeff says it'll do whatever it needs to do to get close to you, and that could be somebody in trouble.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's also, that part is absolutely terrifying because it's in her house. The first time the thing is in a safe space for her. And that's like, I mean,
and like Paul has just been in there and been like, nope, nobody's in there.
Yeah. Oh my God. That is so, I don't know. There's something deeply terrifying. For me, actually, though, the tall man takes it. But I really think that is one of the most effective jump scares I've seen in a while. The one where Yara's at the door, but then he comes behind her. I mean, it's just, I was, we had seen this movie before, and we were rewatching it, and I forgot that, and that really got me this time. Just, there's a music cue, and he's just casting people that have a interesting and unusual look is crucial, and that guy is real tall. So it's creepy, man.
It's also just like, it's so perfectly done where it disarms you because you're like, oh, it's just
her.
And then out of the shadows like looms this figure.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Do you think so? I was like in a place where I kept thinking, because he says it could be somebody I kept thinking, like, when you first see the old lady, I was like, is that the grandma? Because we've seen a picture of the grandma next to the dad. And the little boy who comes after, I think after we see Yara, there's a little boy that kind of like scrabbles out. Is that the neighbor kid who's always spying on her? Who's always like checking her out while she's in the pool or changing?
I didn't clock that. I mean, he has the same hair, but
he has the same hair. I thought it was. I thought it was the neighbor kid. I think, poor Jay. Like she's got these guys, she's got, this dude who's like set up shop in an abandoned house to like woo her and then give her a deadly disease. And then she's got Paul just like panting all over her all the time. And then these children like literally like up on the roof to watch her in her underwear in the bathroom.
Yeah. There's, it's funny, in The Myth of the American Sleepover, there's a character who's played by Amy Seimetz, who is like the older sister of, and one of the characters kind of has a crush on her and is kind of like stares at her when she's going around in the kitchen while he and his friends are hanging out. And it does really feel like it follows, just picked up with her story and just, readjusted its perspective. And so suddenly you're looking at the kind of with like amusement and a bit of like exhaustion as she is the one in the pool when the neighboring boys are staring at her.
Yeah.
And it seems a little different. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I mean, he did that as well. And Under the Silver Lake, now that I'm thinking about it, just with the all the shots with Riley Keough in the pool and being spied on by by what's Andrew Garfield. But yeah, sorry.
I thought a lot about, I don't know, Alison, if you thought about this too, but Sofia Coppola was in my head, specifically Virgin Suicide was in my head so much this time around watching it. I think there's the dreamy haziness of it, the Michigan setting of it as well. But also at one point they say about Jay, she's like, it's annoying how beautiful she is. But you kind of get her perspective of like, it's also exhausting to be a beautiful teenage woman. And like, the experience Lexi goes through in Virgin Suicides, that's just sort of like, I'm just going to give up and die. Like this is, for some reason, there's so many shots of them just lying around, limbs everywhere, just like a pile of girls, this two sisters and Yara sleeping together.
It's also hazy. He's either using some diffusion filter or something, but he's creating this sort of hazy look. And also he's setting it with integrating both present day stuff, but also 70s and 80s, like they have black and white TV and the clothes they wear.
No one has a cell phone.
Yeah.
Everyone has a landline.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I think it definitely has that kind of sponginess. It's suburban. Like it's suburban life is definitely, it feels as much allegory as it is, an actual setting.
Yeah.
But also, what I think of Virgin Suicides, I think like it feels like there are clear parallels, and yet also what's so interesting about it is that in the Virgin Suicides the sisters are kind of melded together into this one collective by the boys outside who are watching them, are made into this kind of like group image of like beauty and youth and promise and mystery. And Jay is unable to like meld herself into the safety of her group. She gets separated. Like this experience kind of culls her. For all that they are with her and they try to help her and be with her to the end, they cannot see the thing that is after her even, like they are just simply cannot follow her all the way through this experience.
Yeah.
Like they can only do their best to help her. And I think there's something very desperately lonely about that, to be at best, like the best you could do is like point at the thing by the pool. You will never kind of have and that's I think also part of why that when she has sex with Paul, it feels a bit like that, an act of that loneliness.
Interesting.
To be like, I have someone in this with me now.
Yep.
For better and worse,
Yeah.
I have a companion.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, the flip side of that is that they demonstrate to a certain extent their, friendship to her, right? That they are willing to go along with this before they even
they're
have
absolutely
any proof.
devoted.
Yeah, it's really great actually that they're so, I don't know, helpful in that. But that again, just to go back to the trauma reading, that's often the experience of when you're trying to help someone who's maybe struggling with depression, but you don't experience depression, or anxiety, but you don't experience anxiety. It's the same. You're just like, I don't know what it's like to be you. So I have to extend some degree of, I can't imagine it. So I just have to be empathetic. Yeah. And not without understanding, because I can't experience it. And I think that's, it's cool that they are open to it. It is interesting that she says, don't tell my mom. So the mom, she doesn't want to go to the mom for help because I think she doesn't think she'll be taken seriously, which is interesting that she stays.
Or that her mother can handle it, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
We see, I think there's one part, I think early on when they're having the kind of sleepover before the kitchen scene, and she walks past what I believe is her mom's room, and you see like a wine bottle on the kind of credenza or whatever that is, and then feet with like shoes still on them on the bed. But I think, also related to that point about the kind of trying to share the burden of trauma without actually being able to share the understanding of the experience itself. One of the things I love about the style of this film is that the camera work, we talked about the point of view shot and like the idea of that putting you right into like the first time into Jay's experience. But there are also times where the camera work is deliberately unempathetic. When the camera does the 360s, and you are sometimes seeing something, you're desperate to like see where it might be. Or when they're at the lake and you see it as Yara coming, instead of holding on this, as it's coming up behind Jay, you keep cutting to the conversation. And each time you see Yara closer and closer. And there's this very much like, it's cut as though it's shot and cut as though it couldn't see the creature coming either, that it doesn't do what you would want from a story that is focused on or to give you a sense of where it is in space. It instead keeps carrying on like everyone else would experience it when they don't see. And I think that there's a great kind of pairing of that with and the POV shot, which is like really puts you in the position of the person who's being approached.
We are all Jay. Unfortunately, fuck. Our situation is bad. But I will say this because just to tie it all together, the ending of the movie you could read as optimistic. Here's why. She didn't overcome the demon, right? That she's still going to get attacked, right? But her and Paul are walking. Now, hand in hand, maybe we're ambivalent about that. But here's what they're not doing. They're not looking backwards. They're not looking over their shoulders anymore. They're moving forward. And now you could take that to be, oh, they're stupid. They think they've gotten over this, but they really haven't. Or you could take that like they've come to terms with it. They've come to terms that this is their lot. And that's something we are all going to have to do. We're all going to have to come to terms with our own mortality, and it's going to be incredibly difficult to do. And, let's hope it doesn't happen anytime soon. But, like, it is something that's going to happen.
Jay, listen, wherever you are, it's somewhere walking straight for you. But it is walking. If you drive far enough, you could buy yourself some time to think, decide if you want to give it to someone else.
I do feel like just part of the appeal of this film to me is that sponginess of it. It feels like it bypasses all of our need for a monster that has a backstory,
Yes.
the monster that kind of makes logical sense in terms of its motivations, and that it taps into this panic that is really common, but that is, I think, rarely rendered on screen in that exact way, which is this, an anxiety dream, right?
Yeah.
An anxiety dream about getting chased.
Yeah.
And I think the ways in which the film refuses to really have anyone be able to offer some clarity about why or how or where it came from just really allows it to, be an experience, and this experience of terror in a way that I really appreciate.
Yes.
That it just is something that the characters have to accept.
Weirdly, for a film that is very straightforward and in some regards very literal about what's going on in it, it is very dreamlike. It's not how my dreams are when I think about them, but it does capture a feeling that I often have, in those types of dreams. Thanks, Alison. And thank you very much for being here with us. Can you tell the folks at home where they might find you on Twitter or the web?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Alison Willmore, Alison with 1 L, Willmore with 2. I've been trying to fast from Twitter lately, with mostly means more just I keep staring at it, but haven't been tweeting as much. Which is really the worst possible combination of approaches. And you can find my work at Vulture, at vulture.com, something else, more. It's easy to find. And also at New York Magazine.
Awesome. And we are at CowsPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.wordpress.com. And in 2 weeks, we'll be talking with Sean Burns about Top Gun. So that'll be to coincide with the Top Gun 2 movie that's coming out. So
Top Gun Maverick.
Top Gun Maverick. So we're doing Top Gun, and that should be fun because we've got a Tom Cruise super fan. One of the cows is a Tom Cruise super fan.
Yeah, guess which one.
Thanks so much, Alison. And we are at CowsPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.wordpress.com. And if you want, there's merch now, cowspod.threadless.com. So pick up a shirt, a mug, a sticker, whatever you want. Anyway, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.